I have a bunch of things to go over today, and let's begin with FPV drones entering the Iran war.
So we've reached the phase in the war where Iranian FPV drones are striking American equipment at bases in Iraq. We also had a 30-day ceasefire proposed by the United States yesterday that Iran overnight seems to have rejected. Now, starting out with this clip that was released by Iranian-backed Iraqi Shia militias, shows a number of FPV drone strikes in Camp Liberty, Iraq. And what you're going to see in this video is an AN/MPQ-64 Sentinel radar get hit, as well as a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, medevac helicopter, actually. Now, Camp Liberty is a base that used to have a massive U.S. presence. It's been significantly dialed down, but we do still have a presence there. And from my understanding, the Iraqis don't fly Black Hawk helicopters. They fly Bell 412s and Mi-8s. That is actually looks
More U.S. radars in the Middle East being taken offline.
it's like a medevac helicopter with it looks like the militia tried to blur out the fact that there was a red cross on the side. But either way, what this is pointing to is that our forces are vulnerable everywhere. It still does not look like we have taken the FPV threat seriously. Unfortunately, we've had 4 years to figure this out. But
Yeah, the U.S. hasn't been adapting very quickly to the threat of drone warfare.
we still have helicopters, expensive helicopters, sitting out in the open, radar sitting out unprotected. Personally, I'm not.
Yeah, the U.S. military hasn't really adapted to FPV drones in the last 4 years. Not at the rate it should have. It didn't. Not at a rate that Russia has been forced to, for example, in Ukraine. And I think militaries are slow behemoths in a lot of cases, and you need, unfortunately, casualties to spur innovation and development. And if we have any type of landing in Iran, put troops on the ground, we'll be facing a lot of this. And we will learn lessons to how to improve our forces, unfortunately.
Convinced that based off the footage that we've seen, that we have taken the adequate defensive measures to protect our troops and our equipment from this threat. And one of the concerns...
No, obviously not. We were not prepared for anything in this Iran war. Our assumption was that there would be regime change the first weekend. And so there was virtually no preparations at all for what came after.
Here is that if Iran surges this capability quickly, and we know they have it, right? There was a picture that came out earlier today.
Of course they have it. Russia and Iran are allies, and they're right next to each other. They've been watching what's been going on in Ukraine. They know all about FPV drones.
Supposedly of an Iranian soldier on Karg Island showing an FPV drone. We know Iran has FPVs, all right? Not a surprise at all. The question is going to be, how many fiber optic FPVs do they have? Out to what range? That's the real question. How many of what type? Not do they have them at all? And we've got this weird mindset that I've been able to pick up, that I've noticed recently, where so long as we do not deploy troops into Iran, they aren't actually going to be at risk of being hit by these drones. That couldn't be further from the truth. Look at...
Yeah, we just watched the proof of that.
Operation Spiderweb, where Ukrainian drone operators in the SBU took out a number of Russian strategic aircraft deep inside of Russia at their...
I was thinking of that exact attack on Russia. Basically, CIA Mi-6 loaded a bunch of containers with FPV drones and got them near strategic bombers in Russia, and then had them fly out and destroy the bombers. And it's another example how basically intelligence agencies in the West have been using Ukraine, and they can attack Russia in any way they want, and then they just blame it all on Ukraine, when Ukraine had practically nothing to do with it. Or in some cases, nothing at all to do with it.
Military airfields. This video that we're playing here is in Baghdad. All right, that's a base where the U.S. has had a footprint for a long time now. Every U.S. military installation around the world...
I think that base is being abandoned as we speak because of, obviously, these threats.
...is at risk of these FPVs. And video after video that we're seeing this shows that nets are not going up. Fencing is not going up in some of these areas. It's hard to see that we're adequately prepared. And this is going to be a problem because if Iran decides to surge this threat in the near term to a number of our bases throughout the region, diplomatic facilities, our embassies, they could do a lot of damage before we actually catch on and start implementing.
In Ukraine and Russia, they have netting over everything that's important. So if you walk outside the building, you're in a military compound, there's like netting all around you. And that protects against the small FPV drones very effectively.
Viable defensive measures. Now, this comes as just yesterday, President Trump announced that we had actually won the war, which was followed shortly thereafter with a discussion about a 30-day ceasefire that it looks like Iran rejected. But here's President Trump yesterday saying that we did it. That's it. We won.
We've won this. This war has been won. The only one that likes to keep it going is the fake news. I mean, the New York Times, you read the New
The Strait of Hormuz isn't closed. It's all in your head. Oil prices aren't going up. This is... Oh, God. Trump always used to exaggerate and bluster and whatever. But at least in the past, I don't remember him lying outright so blazingly.
New York Times, it's like we're not winning a war where they have no Navy and they have no Air Force and they have no nothing. And we literally have planes flying over Tehran.
There was an article in a UK paper that said, we've destroyed 100% of the military capacity. The problem is the 0%. We're getting completely fucked by the 0% of Iran's military capacity.
And other parts of their country.
Now, the president says a lot of stuff like this, but we're kind of balancing this with, I'm hearing folks say, we need to be patient. War takes a long time, and they're correct. But
unfortunately, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, so time is not on our side. Iran keeps the Strait of Hormuz closed 6 months, they win. Democrats win Congress, Trump gets impeached. Regime change in the United States instead of Iran. The entire world sees this Iran project as a failure. That's what happens. Time frame 6 months, and the clock is running down. We don't have time to spare and say, anyone saying this war takes a lot of time is not on our side.
We've also got the head of state here regularly. I mean, this is like the third or fourth time that he has said we've already achieved all of our objectives. We've already won. It's basically over. So
I don't think we've secured Iran's nuclear material. I don't think we've done regime change. Not when you replace the doddering old peace-loving Ayatollah with his son that has his entire family killed and is incredibly vengeful and probably hates us 100 times more.
So that is what is kind of expediting, is kind of pushing along expectations. Having the American people say, well, the president says it's over. Shouldn't we expect some sort of immediate result? And it's not there yet. I mean, the Strait of Hormuz is still...
No, all the results that have happened so far are bad. All our military bases near Iran being basically leveled, the Strait of Hormuz being closed, oil prices skyrocketing. Only results from Trump's war so far for the United States are negative. Still, some people think it was a good idea.
Close. In fact, yesterday, there's rumors started coming out that there was a ceasefire proposed from the United States to Iran for 30 days. And we got to take this with a big grain of salt. Because first off...
No, a mountain of salt. We'll look at what the points of this proposal, just, for a laugh. But basically, Iran's not even probably reading this. They've rejected it outright.
President Trump was speaking at the time that this supposedly came out. He didn't say anything of it, which is not very much like him. You think that he would want to announce some big progress like this. But shortly after he wrapped up his remarks, we got this leak of a 15-point peace plan sent to Iran.
This peace plan, this 15-point peace plan was done to back up Trump's claim that there was some sort of negotiation going wrong. It was basically to save face for Trump. Never mind that no Iranian is actually reading it. Or if they are, they're reading it through the media the same way we are.
on to end the war. Now, in the plan, by and large, it's what we saw at the beginning of the conflict, what the United States has argued for a long time. No ability to enrich uranium. So we've taken that.
Yeah, let's actually jump right into that. Those ridiculous 15-point proposals.
We'll
This is
we'll get
literally
into
developing
that,
as we talk.
Let's get into the reporting from. Now, it's important to understand that the reporting first emerged out of Israel and from Israeli media. And I was talking to my colleague Jeremy Scahill this morning. He was saying that we should take the specifics with a grain of salt, according to his sources in Tehran. But it is indeed true. And actually, we can put up with Jeremy's post here. It is indeed true that the U.S. has sent an offer sheet basically for a 30-day ceasefire.
Yes, as the title of this video states, Trump begs for humiliating ceasefire with Iran. Yes.
Iran is reviewing.
Although I'm not sure who it's humiliating for. Yes, it would be humiliating if Iran accepted it. The fact he's making the proposal is humiliating for him.
Iran is extraordinarily skeptical of the seriousness of the United States because twice they have entered into negotiations and killed the negotiators and then launched wars with Iran. They killed Hamas negotiators after delivering a peace deal to Hamas, like this was the Trump peace deal.
Yes. So, I'd forgotten about that one. But yes, that's another occasion where diplomacy is just used to kill people and to assassinate, and it's never serious.
They met to discuss it.
It's not a good omen.
Yeah. So they're like, yeah. So until they're reviewing it, and there's been no formal response yet, according to Jeremy's sources. And until then, the
problem is Trump and Israel don't regard the Iranian side seriously. The Iranian side is a regime they want gone. They want dead. Do you negotiate seriously with someone you want to kill? No, as far as they want them dead, gone. So any negotiation with them is to attain the objective of killing them. That's all it is. They don't regard the Iranian regime or the Iranian people seriously.
Retaliatory strikes will continue. The war is on until it's off. Like there's no pausing on the assumption that this is serious. But it's still worth us going through the terms. Just understand that some of the details are probably shaded a little bit. That
if the U.S. truly respected and cared about the Iranian people, they wouldn't have shorted the Iranian rial and caused like high inflation inside Iran just to try to topple the government. He would have, Anyone who's seen Asmongold's video from his viewer in Iran talk about how bad inflation is, well, remember, we're a big part of causing that, especially in the last year. Yeah, we're nearly 100% the cause of that.
That were released out of Israeli media.
Yeah, so let's put them up on the screen. This is A0, the 15.
You want to go through these since you have better eyes?
Yes, I remember my glasses, although I don't always. This is from, as Ryan said, Israeli media.
So here they are again, the 15 points. And I'll let, the reason I switched to this video is so she could read them instead of me.
Channel 12 being cited. 1, 15 clauses here. 1, automatically cancel the threat of reimposition of sanctions.
Which is incredible, by the way. That's opening bid from the U.S.
I had to think about that one twice. I remember.
That is how so basically they're going to say they're going, oh yes, they've removed the sanctions on Iranian oil recently. That's crazy. In the middle of this war with Iran, Trump removed the sanction on the Iranian oil. That's how tight the oil markets are. And we'll get into that more in a second. It's getting bad in terms of oil shortages. But this, number one, is to remove the possibility of Iran oil being sanctioned again. That's what they're offering.
Like Iran gets its sanctions lifted. Like incredible. Okay,
that's yeah. 2, dismantling Iran's existing nuclear capabilities.
They already agreed to that in February.
3, agreement with Iran. Iran vows never seek nuclear weapons.
They agreed to that in February.
Preventing the enrichment of any nuclear material on Iranian territory.
That is probably a
enriching nuclear material has medical applications in treating cancers and stuff. So if you completely forbid the enrichment of any nuclear material, a lot of people will die of cancer. It's part of the treatment of certain cancers. So that's in the U.S. proposal. I'm sure there's a big exception for that. At least if they want to have any hope of it being accepted. But this is a stupid point I'm making because Iran's not going to ever accept this.
Reporting or misinformation from Israel, I would suspect that the details are not that tight.
Yeah, okay, interesting sticking point there.
That'd be a total prevention.
5, delivery of enriched uranium to the IAEA.
This, before the war, might have been possible. Now, there's zero possibility of it happening. Zero.
Iran basically agreed to some version of that. They even agreed to allow U.S. companies to operate the Iranian program in February. So just because Iran, by the way, agreed to these things in February,
Exactly. They're not going to agree to it now. Of course not.
doesn't mean they will now. They're in a better position.
Much better. They're basically winning the war, and they just stay the course and they'll get regime change in the U.S. via impeachment of Trump. By that, all they have to do is keep the Strait of Hormuz closed.
They were, ironically, in February. Anyway, go ahead.
Delivery, I just did that one. 6, decommissioning and destroying the sites of Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow. 7.
That's probably a little bit not exactly how it reads.
Well, that's an interesting one too, because we basically have claimed to destroy Natanz.
Right. No, we already did that.
That was Midnight Hammer.
Yeah. Check. Okay.
Grant the IAEA full access to all information.
Check.
Iran abandons proxies approach.
That's off the table. Even back in January, they said no way to that. So why would they accept it now if it was off the table in January when they were in a much weaker position?
Well, that's interesting. Maybe this is the kind of thing Iran agrees to and then just doesn't live up to, which is a very Israeli/Middle East thing to do sometimes.
Stopping funding and arming militias in the region, so
It's the
similar.
same thing.
Well, those 8 and 9 are the same. Effectively, I don't know why they bothered separating them into 2 points.
Yep, keeping the Strait of Hormuz open without any closure.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to.
Yeah, this is basically, that is the one Trump cares about in this proposal. He wants the Strait of Hormuz open. And of course he does. And he probably intends to attack Iran at this point, maybe to ensure the Strait of Hormuz gets open. Well, he's moved all these troops in the region, and so far, whenever he's moved troops in regions or planes into the region, he's always used them. Last year, when he moved planes into the region, he did Operation Midnight Hammer. This time, he moved aircraft carriers into the region, and he used them to bomb the Supreme Leader. He's moving the 82nd Airborne Brigade and this Marine unit from Japan into the region. He's going to use them. He always does.
Open as long as you pay them.
I was going to say, they've learned. Postponement of decision on ballistic missile program.
In other words, cool. Yeah, get off our jock about the missiles.
A few more here. Ballistic missiles are only used for defense.
According to them, that's all that they're used for. And
Well, to be fair, they didn't use them until they were attacked.
actually, they have never, as far as I'm aware of, and correct me if I'm wrong out there in the comments, I'm not aware of them ever launching a ballistic missile strike against any country where they weren't hit first.
Lifting all sanctions on Iran.
Incredible.
Yeah.
From the U.S.
This is the stuff.
Problem about that is it takes like 1 second to reverse that. Trump could change his mind and reimpose sanctions. It would be, look what happened last year. They agreed to a ceasefire after a 12-day war, and then he attacks again this year. So it could be the same situation where he releases sanctions now because he's in a bad spot because of the Strait of Hormuz. Then when he's more prepared to deal with Strait of Hormuz or air defenses in the region are buffed up, he could then reimpose the sanctions. You can't really trust Trump on this. He doesn't regard Iran as people. I'll get to that in a later part of this my stream today. But yeah, they don't trust the United States. They don't negotiate in good faith.
Summary.
This is a real blow to the Trump is winning the war crowd.
Right.
Like, we're going to lift all sanctions in order to end this war, but we're definitely winning it.
And we're going to tell you.
Yes, very good point. If we were winning the war, we would not be offering to lift all sanctions.
To destroy the sites that we said we basically destroyed. All right, last one or two more. Support for the development of a civilian nuclear program. Automatically canceled the threat.
They agreed to that basically in February, but the U.S. refused it.
The last one is just automatically canceled the threat of reimposition of sanctions.
Same thing as number one. Like, so you're promising multiple times that you won't sanction them.
Right, in different ways. Let's then, Ryan, talk about the story that broke overnight from the Wall Street Journal. And again, this is pretty new. According to the Politico summary, their peace proposal demands include, quote, the closure of all American bases in the Gulf.
Yes, what we're hearing now is Iran's counterproposal.
The payment of reparations for missile attacks on Iran, plus the lifting of all existing sanctions. They want to collect fees for ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz, to the point you just made, an end to Israeli attacks on Hezbollah, and permission to start its missile building program without limits. Ryan, the question, though, is how legitimate is...
Yeah, how do the two positions seem close? They don't seem close to me. They seem pretty damn far apart. And now let's break into a very important story, which is the situation in oil markets. Before we begin this video, let's just check in. I don't expect anything crazy with, oil is where it is, between 90 and 100. It's where I've been saying I expect it to be for a few more weeks.
The oil shock has moved way beyond being just strictly a price problem. The blockage of the flow of oil through Hormuz has created a very real shortfall and even some actual fuel shortages across much of Asia. And it's now threatening Europe, according to the CEO of Shell Oil Company. We're only 4 weeks into this thing, and it's already creating severe disruptions in places like Australia and India, South Korea, the Philippines.
And the reason these shortages are appearing now is it takes time for those oil tankers to cross the globe. So even the Strait of Hormuz was closed 3 weeks ago. Well, there were ships still sailing towards Australia and these other places when the strait closed. Those ships have arrived. The oil inside has been processed. But the next ship that was supposed to come, that one's not coming. And so just now is where the shortages are starting to actually hit.
The Philippines especially hard hit, Egypt, and the list goes on. In fact, just today, we've got reports that governments are telling airlines across Asia they should prepare themselves for fuel rationing, in several countries outright hoarding fuel. In fact, that's where the growing global oil shortage is being felt first and foremost, with carriers across Asia being warned that they may encounter foreigners hoarding supplies and leaving them potentially stranded. Now, obviously, the best case scenario is that a ceasefire gets worked out between the U.S. and Iran, and it leads to a lasting resolution.
Not going to happen anytime soon. So get rid of your hopes in that area.
And while it's definitely a possibility, and it's one that the oil markets themselves are taking seriously, there isn't a whole lot of information about, something like the ceasefire, and there's nothing close, of course, being verified, let alone confirmed.
Shell boss warns Europe is next after Asia suffers fuel squeeze.
Yet oil prices did tumble yesterday.
Indian police manage long lines as panic grows over fuel shortages.
On the reports, and they remain a lot lower than they had been at the worst parts. As it currently stands, WTI is back to $90 a barrel, Brent is just above 100, and Murban has...
That's where oil prices will be held for the foreseeable future. The way the U.S. financial system works is the major banks act as market makers in derivative contracts for basically every type of commodity and stock and everything. There is a huge swing in energy commodities, oil, and that the market makers aren't ready for. That could bring down the financial system if it's allowed to play out naturally. Hence, the absolute need to put a lid on them, to not let, realistically, with this closer Strait of Hormuz, oil prices should have gone up and into this territory here, between 120 and 130 as a starting measure. And while people see how long it's going to go on and everything, just based on the temporary closure. It didn't, because They released oil from strategic reserves. They probably sold a huge amount of oil futures in the derivative markets. And you had Trump going out and making all these statements, everything possible to hold this down. And what will happen is after financial institutions can reposition themselves, then prices will be allowed to go up further. Because at that point, banks won't go under because of they know the move up is coming.
Absolutely plunged from its panic high last Friday when it was just shy of $150 all the way to around where Brent is. So that's at least some good news. However, even if Hormuz is open tomorrow, it's going to take weeks, if not months, to restore oil flow. And then there's the consequences on top of everything else. And of course, the longer the blockage lingers onward, not only will that amplify the direct negative impacts, downstream of these energy shortages, we're going to see even more demand destruction as the consequences continue to ripple throughout the global system, only starting in Asia. It's one key reason why the dollar is stronger more recently, including against China's yuan. China's yuan and its trillion-dollar merchandise trade surplus. Over the last month, CNY has stopped rising and has gone sideways to partly lower. And it's not
one reason for that, and one reason the Chinese yuan isn't crushing the US dollar, is that you can't easily buy it or invest in it. It's not, there are capital controls. Their currency is tightly regulated. If you or me wanted to put their money in yuan, it's not easy. There's no, the only way would be to actually move to China and then open a bank account in China. That's the only way to practically to put your money in yuan. And that's one reason that dollar is still a beneficiary to like panic and uncertainty in the world markets, is because it's a safe haven that people can actually easily put their money into. Whereas the yuan is a lot more complicated.
Not just Asia, as I said, we're already seeing the fallout show up in places like Europe and the United States, where yesterday S&P Global reported for its PMI the first contraction in the U.S. employment index in over a year. That's the primary economic risk from any energy shock. History shows conclusively oil spikes are not inflationary. They're instead paid for out of employment. Businesses.
I will qualify here. It's both. It's stagflation. Oil shocks do make oil prices go up too, of course. But yes, they immediately they also cause a recession. They do both. Stagflation is the word. If Iran holds the Strait of Hormuz closed for 6 months, we'll have stagflation. High energy prices, high gas at the pump, and a recession.
That are already struggling with a bad economy to begin with after 2024 and 2025, having been pushed to the edge of laying off employees, flat beverage, before the surge in energy costs this month, with gasoline into the $4 range. And
oh, no. You can't look at what was happening with inflation in this period really as just from an economics perspective. There was stuff going on behind the scenes, and yeah. I won't get into that now, but the oil shock, it does both. It's stagflation. It hurts the economy and it pushes prices up.
And diesel upwards of $5 per gallon, threatening to really flat beverage the economy from here. It is a race against time. And that's where we're only facing the price part of the shock around Asia and soon to be seen in Europe. Not only are oil costs shooting through the roof, everyone there increasingly will have to contend with outright shortages. In fact, that's
going to the gas station and there's no gas.
The entire reason why prices have gone so haywire insane in such a short period of time. There are a bunch of initial indications that we already have begun to get. And let's start with Australia and this report, which comes from yesterday. Quote, hundreds of service stations across Australia have reported fuel shortfalls as the war in the Middle East
just like I said,
supplies. At least 600 retail sites across the country have run out of at least one type of fuel, Energy Minister Chris Bowen told Parliament on Tuesday. The shortages were mainly concentrated in the two most populous states, New South Wales and Victoria, where it affected about 10%.
Yeah, one reason there's all these shortages is that once the Strait of Hormuz closed, all these countries need to scramble for other sources of oil. And I'm sure that to some extent, like Russian oil, but those tankers of Russian oil might not have been as close as the Strait of Hormuz to Australia. And so you're going to have a gap between last tanker from the Strait of Hormuz and the eventual arrival of the oil tanker from Russia. And that gap is the reason why you have actual shortages
of total outlets. Now, the Australian government had already announced a few small measures trying to expand the available supply of various fuel.
Also, I'm not sure what type of strategic reserve Australia has. Off the top of my head, it doesn't seem like the cautious type of place like Japan, which has like 200 days. I'm guessing it's doesn't have as big a buffer.
Types. On March 19th, so last week, the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment, and Water issued a statement about how...
Yeah, it seems more country focused on climate change rather than actually being prepared for anything like, an oil shock.
It's going to help secure the country's fuel supplies. Quote, a temporary 20% reduction of the minimum stockholding obligation for diesel and petrol, making up 762 million liters of additional diesel and petrol available to the Australian market. And this release is targeted to support regional areas. Working with industry to increase fuel supply to service stations, which is not working so far, including by helping the fuel sector secure authorization from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission to coordinate supply and unlock bottlenecks. Temporarily amending Australia's fuel quality standards to allow higher sulfur levels to allow around 100 million liters a month of new petrol supply. A 6-month adjustment to lower the flashpoint for diesel, increasing diesel supply options from refiners and international sources. Before we go on with our video today, let me ask you a question. What if your gold could actually pay you?
Let's skip the ad.
Restaurants, shops, cafes, and shopping malls will be required to close at 9 p.m. for a period of 1 month. An exception will be made for Thursdays and Fridays, with the government set to review the situation following this initial phase. And speaking during his weekly press conference on Wednesday, the Prime Minister added that the government will move to deactivate billboard lighting in streets and public squares. Now, India is vulnerable, as we've been talking about, like a lot of its...
All these steps, that's only a start. My parents, when they were growing up and the oil shock back then, cars were able to fill up their gas tanks, odd license plates on certain days and even license plates on other days. That's how they did rationing back then. It was crazy.
Its neighbors, obtaining a huge proportion of its crude oil
and I think on Sunday no one was allowed to drive. Was another thing, and everyone was on bicycles everywhere.
Energy needs directly from the Middle East, with a lot of that coming from ships that go right through the Persian Gulf into the Strait of Hormuz. While there are reports some Indian flag tankers have been allowed to transit the strait, I guess some deal that might have been worked out with what exists of the government in Iran, it is nowhere near enough, and it never will be short of full and open traffic. So only a little over a week into the conflict, there were already accounts of problems, even at that early stage.
And it's only going to get worse. And this is just a preview of how it will be all over the world. Well, all oil importing nations around the world.
Alternative fuel options are being activated to ease pressure on liquefied petroleum gas and gas channels, according to the oil minister in telling Parliament a couple of weeks ago. Kerosene is being made available for retail outlets and public distribution channels, and fuel oil is being made available for industrial consumers. The South Asian nation imports nearly 90% of its crude, half of its liquefied natural gas, and 2/3 of its LPG, most of which comes from the Middle East and travels through the Strait of Hormuz. As the news of restaurants halting operations flooded social media platforms, the oil minister...
Well, I think that gives you a good idea of the situation in terms of oil market. It's getting bad. And so let's move on to something I mentioned earlier, the hate of Iran.
There's been some discussion about whether the Iranians understand how hostile, how implacably hostile to them the political establishment in the United States
Exactly.
basically is. On the Duran, a few days ago, we did a program with Jim Jatras, a former US State Department official, in which Jim Jatras made that very point, that Iran, in its discussions with the United States, needs to understand.
It's the reason why Trump felt nothing at attacking during negotiations and all the betrayals he's done towards Iran, and he does the entire U.S. establishment, which influences Trump, and possibly Trump himself, just don't regard Iranians as people, or at least their current leadership.
That the United States is so implacably hostile to itself that negotiations with the United States, from anything other than a position of overwhelming strength, are basically pointless. Because any deal done which leaves the United States in any sort of position of advantage is never in the end going to be honoured. The
Exactly.
Iranians undoubtedly.
I will point out about not being honored. Last year, during the 12-day war, when Russia brokered a ceasefire between Iran and Israel. And as part of that agreement, both sides agreed not to attack the other first. And less than a year later, what does Israel do? It attacks. Because they just don't respect, they don't view them as people. They hate them.
Do understand this.
Any deal they enter with Iran is honored only as long as it's convenient to honor.
If you go to the Iranian media, you find statements to this effect there all the time. So, if this is a set of proposals, this is the proposals that Donald Trump is actually placing before the Iranians are going to give them short shrift. They're going to reject them wholesale. It is inconceivable that they would do otherwise. They were already rejecting these proposals before the June and February attacks. The February attack, which is of course still underway, is all but certain to have hardened their position.
Agreed.
Wait to what, of course, they're both saying. Anyway, the point is that and I'm going to summarize very briefly, the 82nd Airborne Division is an extremely well-trained unit.
Yep,
It's
it is.
specifically geared towards carrying out certain roles. Amongst these roles is the capture of what might be described as bridgeheads. And capturing bridgeheads is normally accompanied with plans for insertion of more heavy units, if you like, in order to consolidate control. Now, this is only a very summary description.
In other words, they're the guys that get sent in first to secure the area to bring in more troops. And since it makes sense, Trump is probably yelling his military, open Strait of Hormuz, and so the military has to come up with some plan. And whatever plan they have, the 82nd Airborne is going to be the first ones in to secure the area for all the troops that follows. And remember yesterday, Tim Pool suggesting that there is a large number of troops heading to the Middle East. And that deployment takes time. But the 82nd Airborne is to prepare the area for those eventual later arrivals.
Of what these two sources are saying. But basically, I think I've summarized it accurately. Now, there's now said to be 3,000 men from the 82nd Airborne Division in the Middle East, and before long, the division could be brought into operation. Both sources say that this could be done relatively quickly. The nature of the 82nd Airborne Division is that it is extremely experienced and has the ability to plan and prepare these operations very fast. So we are not...
Yes, it's the entire point. What we've been sending in, the Marines and the Airborne unit, is what can be deployed really fast. And stuff takes longer is taking longer and will arrive later.
Looking at months of time before it goes into action. But the second source, perhaps more than the first one, nonetheless, also spoke about a very high-risk operation. Indeed, an operation.
Remember, FPV drones. Iran has a lot of them.
In which what is ultimately a light infantry force is going to be thrown into battle, potentially,
Yep.
against an enormous country
Possibly as early as this weekend.
with very extensive armed forces, with no clear guarantee of any follow-up to enable it to fulfill whatever objective it's been tasked with. As to what that objective is, by the way, neither source says. They don't have access to that kind of information. Now, reading all of this and reading various other reports of this kind, I'm going to say that it did bring back to mind a battle that took place in the early 1950s in a place in Vietnam called Dien Bien Phu. During the conflict, the colonial conflict between the French
Yes, let's listen to this one last example before moving on.
and the Vietnamese, led by the Vietnamese Communist Party, who were seeking independence from France, the French gambled on a high-risk operation of using airborne forces, paratroopers, to seize positions well behind Vietnamese lines in the expectation that France would have total air superiority and would be able to keep the paratroopers supplied by air.
Spoilers.
And this operation would somehow
didn't.
turn the balance of the war. What the French quickly discovered is that the organization and willpower and capability of the Vietnamese was far greater than they expected or imagined. The Vietnamese responded rapidly. The French force was quickly surrounded and was shelled into submission by the Vietnamese, triggering a catastrophic defeat, which ultimately brought about the defeat of France in the wars in Vietnam and Indochina. Now, in my childhood and early youth, Dien Bien Phu was a very vivid memory. I don't hear it talked about very much anymore. Perhaps, given that what possibly is being planned here.
This is very long way of saying that what we're planning in Iran might be extraordinarily stupid.
With the 82nd Airborne Division, he's not so different from Dien Bien Phu. It might be a good idea for some American planners to revisit what happened in that battle. Again, it might.
It won't happen because the problem is Trump is just screaming at the behind closed doors. He's just screaming at the military, open the Straits of Hormuz. And so the military is going to attempt to open the Straits of Hormuz because Trump believes America is the greatest military in the world, which is true when it's not getting fucked over, which is what Trump is doing. He's throwing them into the absolute worst possible scenario, like Iran invading Iran and securing the Strait of Hormuz with zero time to really effectively prepare or plan ahead because the preparations began after Trump decided to bomb Iran. Oh my God.
Might avoid a potential disaster, which it seems to me might be looming over the horizon. Now, anyway, that's what I want to say about the Russians launched their first a rocket from their space center in Plesetsk above the Arctic Circle.
Also mentioning that Russia, again, yesterday sent up their own Starlink. And he makes a point that Russia has been using less FPV drones, less Garan-type drones, in the last few months than people expected, given how many they're producing. And he's making the point that it probably has to do with them waiting for these satellites to be up in place so that they can use them to control the drones and be that much more lethal with them. So that's an interesting opinion.
Circle, which placed into orbit 16 satellites of the, I believe it's called Rusvet system. Now, Rusvet is Russia's analog to the Starlink system.
Exactly. And this I just thought was funny, so I just react to it quickly.
J.D. Vance. Iran tells the United States it does not want to resume talks with Witkoff and Kushner, prefers negotiating with Vice President J.D. Vance instead.
So Iran saying we prefer J.D. Vance. What goes through my mind is, oh, okay, that's why they're holding Strait of Hormuz closed like that, just in a few months, like maybe a year, maybe Vance will be president and they can negotiate with him. They might be able to actually control who they negotiate with if they close Strait of Hormuz long enough. So that struck me as funny. Now, let's go in for a Tucker rant, which I think I'm going to agree with. Rants are always fun, aren't they?
And the purpose of the American government is to serve the American people.
Agreed.
Not in some abstract way in their war against radical Islam, but in a concrete way, like nicer airports and no crime and decent schools. The things that any citizen should expect from his government. And if you're totally ignoring all of those on behalf of another country, it's just not acceptable. And it's also not sustainable.
Yep.
This country has not, at least since the Second World War, handed any measure of operational control in a wartime theater to a foreign power. And why is that?
That's changed.
Not because we don't have allies or people we like or people we share common goals with. We've got a lot of those, or we had a lot of those. But because no two countries' interests are identical. Even identical twins, if you spend enough time around them, are different in ways you can perceive. No two anything are exactly the same. And nations, which are complicated, don't even have that many points of intersection in their interests. There's a lot that separates the national interests of two separate countries. So if you enter a war co-joined with another country, you're going to reach a point very soon where your interests diverge from those of your partner. And in a war, the stakes are very, very high. So you would never do that. Ever. If you cared about your country, why would you do that? And of all the things that historians will
just saying common sense so far,
will reveal in the aftermath of this war, the one that some of us should be paying the closest attention to is who made that decision? Who decided it was okay for the United States to be yoked to a foreign nation in the middle of a war with a country of 92 million people? That is one of the craziest things this country's ever done, and the people who decided to do it should be exposed and they should be penalized. Because that single decision will cost, unfortunately, this is likely to be true, more American lives. It may extend this far past a point where the American interest is served. And by the way, we are approaching the point at which we get no more returns from being engaged in this war. If you know that you're going to negotiate your way out of something,
what returns have we gone so far?
In the end, in other words, if you're not going to destroy each other with nuclear weapons and demand total abject surrender, but if you think there's even a possibility you're going to have to negotiate your way out of something, you want to do it at the apogee of your power, at your most powerful point. You don't want to do it when your power is obviously decreasing. Like, say, when you start to run out of weapons because you sent them all to Ukraine because Ben Shapiro demanded you do that.
Yeah,
and
that was another
stupid. You want to negotiate when your weakness is obvious because you...
Ukraine, another foolhardy effort. Another losing battle of the deep state against Russia.
Get worse terms. The United States has a true national interest in controlling or having a say in the flow of energy out of the Persian Gulf through the Straits of Hormuz. If you could narrow down our interests to just one, we have many interests, but just one, it's that. It's very important for the United States to have some say in that. And if we negotiate our way out when we're weaker rather than stronger, we will have less say. And if
before this war started, the Strait of Hormuz were open, had been open forever. There was no one who controlled the Straits of Hormuz before this war. We gave them the Straits of Hormuz to Iran by bombing their supreme leader. We gave them an excuse that was powerful enough to justify closing the Strait of Hormuz, and that an excuse that its allies, Russia and China, would accept.
If we negotiate our way out in humiliation, God forbid that doesn't happen, we will have almost no say at all.
But that's the only exit. Iran, the only way Iran would even begin the negotiations right now is if we agreed to humiliating concessions. And if we don't begin right now, then it'll get to the point, like Tucker says, where they have, in absolute military and economic terms, an advantage. So, yeah, there's no getting out of this on our terms, on good terms for the United States.
And so it is very important to begin those conversations. Now, if you think there's a possibility we could negotiate our way out, if we don't have to go to nukes. And let's hope that we do believe that. So what stands in the way? Well, again, as noted, the Iranians, they've got to be reasonable and willing to bend a little bit, and that's not easy because they're not that reasonable and they're inflamed right now. But it's not just the Iranians, it's Israel too. And
that's the dimension of this. It's so complicated. You not only have Iran that has no interest in negotiations, but you have Israel too that has no interest in negotiations.
From the very first day,
Israel that has no interest in negotiations too.
Israeli priorities have taken precedent over American priorities. American national interest has been pushed down, and in its place has been elevated Israeli national interest. And what specifically are we talking about here? Think about the target list. So the first big strike of the war,
this is going to be interesting, I think,
eliminated the Ayatollah, who was 86 years old and not simply the head of state technically, but the head of a religion, Shia Islam. Apparently had prostate cancer and was totally willing to be martyred. So that alone should tell you.
Oh, it's the first time I heard that he had prostate cancer. He might have been willing to be martyred, but probably didn't want his granddaughter to be martyred with him.
Wait a second. Why would we kill that guy? He may be bad. He may be the most evil person in the world. Mark Levin tells us he's Hitler. Great. Or bad. We're against that. We're against Hitler. But killing him will have what effect? 60 seconds. Predict. Oh, maybe it will unite the country on religious grounds and make the opposition to the United States and Israel stronger. Maybe it's also a kind of point of no return after which you can't really negotiate your way out.
That's exactly it. That's why oh my God, this is so stupid. Everything else he could have negotiated his way out of, but you killed Supreme Leader, there's no off-ramps anymore. You're just fucked, Trump.
You killed our religious leader. When was the last time America killed a religious leader? It's not a defense of the Ayatollah. Sorry, Ben Shapiro. It's not a defense of Shia Islam. It's a defense of American national interests. And if you're having trouble remembering the last time we killed a religious leader, it's because we haven't killed any religious leaders, at least not openly. Because we don't want to start religious wars. Because they're hard to fight and very hard to resolve. And how is that good for us? How is that good for our access to LNG and oil from the Gulf? Tell me.
Not good at all.
Shapiro, can you find the Gulf on a map? No. So why did we do that? Now, we don't know exactly why we did that. Maybe there were American military planners who thought sincerely, hey, I've got an idea. Let's kill the Ayatollah. Then all the liberal...
Well, Asmongold thought it was a great idea to bomb the Supreme Leader. I still need to make a video explaining to him how stupid it was. Maybe I'll work on it today. I'll think about it.
The country will rise up. They won't actually discover their latent Shia Islam and rally around an 86-year-old man who was killed along with his family. Maybe there were actually American military planners who thought that, but more likely, there were Israeli strategists who realized that once the United States kills the Ayatollah, kind of can't get out. We're all in. And so that's the point.
Yep, exactly.
This can never work in America's national...
They have to trick Trump into bombing the Ayatollah, and then he'll find out afterwards that Strait of Hormuz are closed and there's no off-ramps.
Interest as long as it is tethered to another country's national interest. And if that doesn't work, if it doesn't work in the middle of a war, it probably doesn't work in peacetime either. It probably doesn't work to have a permanent Israeli detachment at, say, the Pentagon, where our wars are planned, or at CIA, where information is collated and analyzed. It probably doesn't work to have people in all branches of government who are dual citizens with Israel and other countries. What?
That is kind of wild. That is wild. That should not be the case. There should be, at the top of any of our U.S. government departments, should not be dual citizens.
Because you're always going to wind up where we are now. which is tethered to another country, which may be a good country or a bad country. We can debate that. But it's not America. And the purpose of the American government is to serve the American people. Not in some abstract way in their war against radical Islam, but in a concrete way, like nicer airports and no crime.
Yes.
And decent schools. The things that any citizen should expect from his government. And if you're totally ignoring all of those on behalf of another country, it's just not acceptable. And it's also not sustainable. And so no matter where this goes, and again, we pray it is resolved peacefully and soon, our country needs to think through how this happened, find out in specific terms, not bury it like 9/11 and every other traumatic event over the last 50 years or 63 years. It's like, oh, we're not really sure. We need to be sure. How did this happen? How can we prevent it from happening again? A sober assessment of...
Yeah, that's... I really do. I think I have a pretty good idea of how we got into this war. They convinced Trump that he was being targeted for assassination by Iran, and that played a big role. Then all the people around him, they managed to get really pro-Israel people all around him. Then they got him to accept a huge amount of Israeli money last election, and all those things together. Plus, you just have the layer of media propaganda about Iran being evil. Plus, you had the protest that convinced him that Iran was on the verge of an uprising, just need to bomb supreme leader.
Wrong. That's what all functional institutions do. They used to be called after-action reports, and they were mandatory, so it didn't happen again. That's what the NTSB does with plane crashes. How'd this happen?
Yeah, how did this happen? How did all these dual citizens, which are citizens of Israel, get so high up in our government and influence everything? We should look into that a little bit. That's a great video by Tucker Carlson, and I think that this will do it for my Iran section today. This will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe, and come watch on Kick or Twitch, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.